Paula? Yeah, that's enough. Okay, great. All right, thank you. Now, I declare open this public hearing of the Senate Rural and Regional Affairs and Transport References Committee. And the committee is hearing evidence for its inquiry into the road transport industry. I do welcome everyone here today. This is a public hearing and a Hansard transcript of the proceedings is being made. Before the committee starts taking evidence, I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence to a committee. The committee prefers all evidence to be given in public, but under the Senate's resolutions, witnesses have the right to request to be heard in private session. It is important that witnesses give the committee notice if they intend to ask to give evidence in camera. If a witness objects to answering a question, the witness should state the ground upon which objection is taken. The committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer, having regard to the ground that is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request the answer be given in camera. Such a request may, of course, also be made at any other time. And if you agree to provide an answer to a question taken on notice during the hearing, please note that answers are due by the close of business, Thursday, the 10th of December 2020. I remind people to ensure, please, your mobile phones are either turned off or switched to silent. Finally, on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank all those who have made submissions and sent representatives here today. I now welcome representatives from the South Australian Road Transport Association, Mr. Shearer by video conference and Mrs. Middleton by teleconference. So for the Hansard record, could you please both give your name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Sharon Lee Middleton. I'm the President of the South Australian Road Transport Association.
And Stephen Blake Shearer. I'm the Executive Officer of the South Australian Road Transport Association.
Thank you very much. It's strange, but everyone who knows this committee, by me calling you Mr. Shearer and Mrs. Middleton really sounds strange. So why don't we just go with Steve and Sharon and Glenn? Are you happy with that?
Certainly.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, and that's not being disrespectful that we have worked on a number of things over the last number of years. So, so what I will do, firstly, Sharon as the president, or Steve, I'll get you to make an opening statement, and this is the bit, you know how it works, where you really want to get it on the record what you want us to hear, and then of course Senator McDonald and myself will go to questions. So who would like to kick off first?
Yep, I'll kick off first, Glenn. I'd like to thank obviously yourself, Glenn, and the group for making this opportunity available to me. I'm glad to have a voice to appear before you, and I think it's vital. Apart from my role as being president, I'm also a person of 37 years of experience in the trucking industry as well, so I make my comments based on real life experiences. I would like to make the following points in regard to the items listed in the terms of reference. In consideration of the development and maintenance of the road transport infrastructure, it's our view that politics plays too big a part in road funding under all parties. Look, it's got to be based on safety and need. There's no doubt that we as an industry pay our way, but we're not seeing the infrastructure that we need. Often our equipment is badly damaged after every journey, narrow lanes, uneven surfaces, and shoulders that are creating critical hazards. Government should certainly prioritise safety upgrades to high-risk roads, including rural and remote. Road maintenance funding should be allocated for the life of the road as part of the project. And we all know that insufficient rest areas exist. We need more of them, and they need to be provided on all heavy vehicle routes, and they need to be fit for purpose and at intervals that enable compliance with fatigue laws under the HVNL. With regard to regulatory impact, we support the review of the HVNL, and we're hopeful that a lot of key issues around fatigue access and those responsible in the chain are dealt with. This means it's got to be amended in full, not a piecemeal, and give a simpler risk-based and safety productivity-focused act. Many of the areas of what we do overlap, so the review which we have waited years for must be a complete overhaul, and as I said, not in parts, not a piecemeal. When I consider the social and economic impact of road-related trauma, road accidents are always traumatic, and believe me, that includes us. And that's despite the fact that 80% of car truck crashes are caused by the motorist. Long-distance trucking has dramatically reduced its crash rate. It's improving all the time, but we see the local rigid fleet and operations needing better focus by the authorities. They're highly represented in the crash stats, and I think under a HVNL, if they're included, 4.5 tonne and over, compliance and safety outcomes are deliverable as they are for the heavy sector of the industry. We need responsible media reporting. Truck drivers are stressed by sensationalised and ill-informed media reporting. We need to help industry deal with a growing society issue of suicide using trucks, a topic that no one other than the truckies are dealing with. We are suffering mental and financially on our own. Government should fund Share the Road Safely and truck programs. On this front, SARTA is launching a $500,000 simulator defensive driving training for heavy vehicles, and that's to help avoid some of the 80% accidents caused by the motorists. In thinking about efficient cost recovery measures, we've lost count on all the failed government projects on charging. 70% of operators are small family businesses, so any system must be simple and fair. Distance location charging should work, albeit mass is a problem. There would be winners and losers. And on that, in previous discussions, the ATO, the Australian Tax Office, should be directed by government, not the other way around. The ATO refused to consider a dual rate system that recognised local operators low kilometres versus line haul high kilometres, thus creating a fair system. When considering the impact of new technology and advancements in freight distribution, vehicle design and road safety and alternative fuels, government should facilitate adaptation of technology advances, which should only mandate technology if there are proven benefits that outweigh the costs, and if some incentives are provided, more flexibility if fatigue management technology issues, such as Guardian. Freight sharing platform providers must be in the chain of responsibility, and all road users must pay their way, including electric vehicles. Australia is a tiny part of the global truck market. Our conditions and operational realities, particularly in rural and remote Australia, are unique and can't be compared to Europe and US motorways. Government has to be realistic in demanding technical standards. Government should work with industry. When I consider establishing a formal consultative relationship between industry and government, I see this as essential. Given the diversity of trucking, the logistics and the tasks, decisions about how we operate must involve those working in it and who truly understand. Our peak bodies around the country already have a very good and effective consultative relationship with government and give operators a voice, members and non-members. All governments should make more use of this when projects start, not just at the end. When considering training and career pathways, as you know, Glenn, as a son and father in a multi-decade business in trucking, the traditional old school ways into the industry have gone. And so has the ability to have 16-year-olds learn all the depot type stuff by getting a forklift licence. That's been taken away. It's now raised to 18, and it's the career entry point for mechanics and for our future warehouse people, our future rigid and semi-drivers. We need that reinstated to 16. We need that under a licence, could come under a trainee contract so it's controlled. We need to set the national competency standards. It must be led by the industry, not by the training industry. Many of our competency standards are inadequate, such as B-double reversing. Over the last 2 decades, high productivity vehicles have become more prevalent, so training needs to change and amend to reflect this. I think I probably have said what I need to say as an operator, what's important to me, and I would hand over now to SARTA's CEO to add any further points.
No, I'm quite happy for us just to go straight to questions. I think it's covered our core issues pretty well. There's a lot in there, and we're happy to explore them with you or other issues.
Well, firstly, Sharon and Steve, thank you very much. And my shorthand shouldn't come as any surprise, is absolutely terrible. But I probably find myself and SARTA on what I heard coming from you, Sharon, there's a cigarette papers difference between us, meaning this is the crazy stuff, because you've all heard, without me rabbiting on, that we all share the same goal. We all get on. We've been at the different stations, which is the sad part. When we all want to get on the same train and get to the same destination. But Sharon, there's a few things I want to unpick, but I'll go all day with a gob full of marbles underwater. So look, I'd like to give Senator McDonald the opportunity if there's something she wants to jump onto first. And I don't want to let you go. I want to come back and dig deep on a few things. So Senator McDonald, in all fairness, is there any questions that you would like to ask before I start rambling on?
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. I want to ask you first about you were recently awarded government funding under the HVSI to develop a driver simulator. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes.
Yes, true. Thank you. And I'm really interested in this technology. I've been out and seen some of you and heard, about the simulators. But I want to ask how you think this will help improve driver and community safety.
Well, perhaps I could answer that, Senator. The submission that we made to the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator under that safety initiative funding covered a number of elements. The first element, which is of interest in South Australia in particular, is driver training in relation to the descent down the southeastern freeway. We've had a number of fatalities that all come back to a driver getting it wrong, a very small percentage of them, in the wrong gear or travelling too far for them both and losing their brakes. So the simulator has a simulation in it about that descent and train drivers specifically on that. But in addition, we're going to train them in relation to defensive driver training. Now, Mrs. Middleton mentioned that multiple reports, including two studies by the Labor government here and multiple national reports, show that more than 80% of the time, crashes between cars and trucks are caused by the motorist making a silly mistake around the truck, and only a minority of motorists. And for years we've said we can't do anything about that. But with this simulator, we can, because we're developing a training program, a driver training program that is designed or will be designed to help drivers anticipate better both by other road users around them and avoid the crashes. So there'll be an automatic benefit immediately once we've got that program rolling. We're also looking at simulations on anti-rollover training, particularly for the livestock industry, so that they don't roll over when they go around corners or any other high centre of gravity freight. And we're looking at skill set training. When somebody gets a B-double licence, the testing, I'm not sure if you can hear me all right because I'm hearing a lot of feedback somewhere. Okay. When you get a B-double licence or an MC licence, they don't test you on reversing skills until the B-double is perfectly lined up with the loading dock. Frankly, that's the easy reversing back to the dock. Skill is bringing the truck in off the road and manoeuvring it to line it up. Example of where the competency standards in the trucking industry, which have been established by the training sector, not the trucking industry itself, they don't actually deal with the issues in the industry. So on skill sets like that, we will have specific simulations to train drivers how to reverse a B-double and manoeuvre it appropriately. We've also got simulations being developed for city traffic and high volume urban corridor traffic. most of those things will flow through with community benefits by either us causing less crashes or us avoiding crashes caused by other people. And then the final element is fatigue management research. We'll be working with the Centre for Automotive Safety Research and other institutions and the NHR and the state and federal departments on research. We've got a number of changes coming to the review of the heavy vehicle law. There are a lot of ideas up in the air about what might not work. We will be able to do research with this simulator that the industry has major influence over instead of it being purely academic and missing the mark. So really, from our point of view, with the great help of the federal government and the state government, the industry in South Australia is now taking full control over trying to influence those outcomes, and the simulator will travel interstate to help our colleagues interstate.
Thank you for that. And you've segued very neatly into my next question, which is around technology advances in fatigue detection technology. And again, I have seen that technology in use at Goondiwindi when I was down there for a workshop the other day. Do you see those new technologies that are being developed as being beneficial for driver safety?
I think Mrs. Middleton might be best placed to answer that because she uses some of that technology.
Perfect.
So, sorry, Steve, the echo is just so bad. What was the question? I can hear you better than I can hear anybody else.
Oh, okay. The question is what your view on the usefulness of the technology such as the fatigue management technology.
Okay. Yep, so within my fleet, I have installed Guardian Seeing Eye. I had to deal with a lot of culture resistance about it when I installed it. I had a lot of drivers that were very concerned about what it was all about. But through working with the team, showing them how it all operates, running meetings with the people from Guardian so that they could ask questions of each other freely. I'm happy to say that the install now has gone really well, and I've got a team of drivers that are extremely grateful that they've got it on board. I did have one driver that had been with me for 11 years leave because of it, but overall the reporting, the peace of mind, particularly I'm not saying it's for every operation, but for me, I run long haul between Adelaide and Perth. So I did a risk assessment of my own business and established for me that having the technology on board would give myself and my operations people peace of mind, and I'm here to say it has. And we're very, very pleased with how the install has gone.
I think it might be worth adding, Senator, that as I'm aware of quite a few companies that have introduced either that system or similar systems, and in almost every case, a small number of their drivers have triggered the system and been shocked when they've seen the video that showed them they were actually having a micro sleep that they didn't know they were having. And companies can use that technology not only to keep that driver safe on that day on that road, but they can begin to identify patterns that might emerge that might lead to changes in schedules. I know in Sharon's company's case, they've now got a process where they get their drivers out of the truck to refresh them, just walking around the truck on a particular timeline. And the drivers really have gone from being very cynical to this is a good thing.
Well, anything that means people come home safely from work is a good thing, isn't it?
Yes.
My final question, Chair, is just on this concept of apprentices. Interestingly, I was in Normanton last week and the operator of a transport company up there raised exactly the same issue with me about how we can have younger people come in on and train exactly as you say on some of those nuts and bolts issues and to start younger. So in that apprenticeship program, I think Sharon mentioned it starting, previously you'd be able to start at 16.
Yes.
At 18. Can you just expand on that a little bit more?
Sure. Perhaps if I go first and then Sharon could comment as an operator. I'm a board member of the South Australian Training and Skills Commission, appointed by the government. And when I agreed to take the role on, I made it clear to the Minister there are several things I'd be trying to achieve, and one of them was this. The minimum age was pushed up to 18 nationally by the safe work agencies, basically, with almost no consultation with all the industries that use forklifts, and most industries do. We are not aware of any evidence that really supported the decision. It was more philosophical, young people and dangerous equipment, and yet we let them drive cars. So the model that we've developed here with the Minister, and we're working through the South Australian Government, is a traineeship with a formal contract of training. That requires particular levels of supervision and training, and so as not to offend the national work health safety regime, we don't provide a national forklift licence, we'll provide a restricted licence, and if the individual worked at Glenstill's transport depot, the use of that licence would be restricted to his depot. So contained and properly managed and trained and supervised, and we know in this state, our current estimate, it will open up some 800 jobs for 16 to 18-year-olds.
Sharon, do you want to add anything additionally to that?
Sorry, Senator Don.
Sharon, do you want to add anything?
Sorry, I just don't hear any of the question, but going by your answer, Steve, I think it's discussion around the value of 16-year-olds having forklifts as an entry point to the industry.
Yes.
Look, it's vital, because at the end of the day, if you can start someone that's 16, you can teach them all about load placement, so loading trucks with the correct weights on different axles. You can teach them about load restraint, how to make sure that things are tied down as they should be for transport. You can teach them about paperwork and, you know, the need for all of that to be done correctly. And then from that, it can then lead to that person then getting a rigid licence, and then because they've done all that time in the warehouse, they know all about how to load their truck and how to unload their truck. So then they learn all about the road rules and managing something bigger on the highway. And then from there, they can go to semi, and then from semi, they can go then up to MC, which is the B double and road train work. Then if they don't decide to go down the driving path, they may decide to go down the workshop path. And, you know, with people having to maintain their fleet, a lot of the transport operators are running their own workshops, and trying to get qualified and trained mechanics is another area of the industry where we're really suffering a shortage of qualified people to do that work. So it's an endways into multiple career paths. And look, I think part of the problem is that trucking is just not deemed a profession. And because it's not deemed a profession, it's not attractive, yet it's one of the greatest jobs that you can have, and it potentially can pay very well if you, depending where you end up and what you do. And it's got great endways even to not even be a truck driver all your life. If you want to tear off and go into logistics and management and training, starting off when you're 16, right at the bottom like that is incredible experience and real value add to the industry.
Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you for that. Look, there's so much to go through. I just want to make first thing, I apologise to South Australia, because Senator McDonald and I had planned to be there, as you know, and unfortunately we'd rather be doing this in public. We'd rather be face to face, and then we were hoping to, you know, interact with membership a lot further than a Zoom meeting for a couple of hours. So unfortunately, it is what it is. There's a number of things I want to touch on. While I hop the trot on the training stuff, and Sharon, and nothing riles me more than the industry that's been created. So pastel-coloured classrooms in TAFE, AXQA that have got no damn idea about the transport industry. Everyone wants to throw rocks at me because I say it as it is. where the heck have we got to? I learned at the hip of my old man. And I'd probably even get beaten up for saying my old man, I should say my auntie and my nana or something, but for crying out loud, this is how we all learn. This turned truck driving, trucking families. Many a times the daughters would be on the forklift, so they'd be out loading as well. You know, it was a family affair. What the hell have we created? Can someone please tell me, where is the productivity dollar? Every time we talk productivity in transport, it's code for how much more of your freight can I cut for nothing. There's me ramble. Anyway, I haven't even started yet. Crikey, it's only early in the morning. So what would, if we could actually get some common sense in this nation, and I know and I congratulate you at SARTA in South Australia. You're going off and doing your own thing in the state because you're not going to get anything done federally. I congratulate Victoria. I know what the QTA are doing, and I congratulate the QTA, Cam Dunmancy over here with the Western Roads Federation. You know, if you sit around waiting and nothing's going to happen. So let's talk a little bit more about what the heck do we need to do to shake the tree, to come together as an industry, because, you know, these dotted lines on maps of Australia, you know, the job's the same, the pressures are the same, the clients are the same. Do we need to make this more of a federal or national problem, a national issue, not a problem, a national issue? Crikey, they don't mind taking tax office everywhere we go. What's your thoughts on that, Steve? Fire up.
Well, I think we all supported the idea of a national heavy vehicle law for exactly the reasons you're talking about in relation to the regulation of the trucking industry. And there were too many variations to that law in various states, and we're slowly getting rid of those. And of course, we've got two jurisdictions that aren't part of the heavy vehicle national law. One suggestion I've heard bounced around is let's have Commonwealth law instead of it being state-based law. And quite apart from the constitutional issue, I think the one challenge we would have, if we're not opposed to that idea, but there's a big caveat. There are many differences between different parts of the country in the environment we work in and the community attitudes. You're fortunate in Western Australia, the community attitude is far more accommodating of the trucking industry, so the WA state government is able to do things that other states constrain. Queensland's a bit like that. South Australia, in metropolitan Adelaide, everybody wishes there were no trucks. It's just not practical. So what we would need to make sure of is whatever model we've got, we're able to deal with the issues that arise at a local level within a consistent national framework. One thing we're very worried about with the review of the heavy vehicle national law, and the committee might be quite concerned about this if you haven't already heard. We've heard from officials that they are contemplating only going forward with parts of the review of the heavy vehicle law, which Mrs. Middleton alluded to. That would be a disaster. The entire law needs a review. Once we've got it right, it all needs to be implemented. We can't go to a more flexible fatigue management regime if we haven't put the risk-based foundation into the law. For example, what I'm worried about is that officials are worried about delivering on time to their ministers. What everyone should be worried about is not the timeline, but getting it right and getting us an act that actually delivers what's needed to give us a safe and productive risk-based law and industry. So I think there's actually some serious work to be done at the political level to ensure that that happens, because if we only do half of the review, we won't get another go for 5 to 10 years. And that would be a disaster.
Well, not only that, Steve, I'll go to you, Sharon, because you're on that review panel, if I'm not mistaken, aren't you?
Yeah, well, I'm part of the review panel that was part of all the initial papers. It's at the regulatory impact phase now, which I've had very little involvement in now that it's at that phase. But yeah, I agree with everything Steve said. If we don't get a complete review of the HVNL and it's only bits and pieces that are adopted, because as I said in my opening, many of the things that we do overlap, we're not going to achieve what we need to achieve. But just in relation to the training side of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but what we've got is that we've probably got the training sector that can see merit in everything we're saying, the 16-year-old forklift driving, buddy training, all sorts of concepts, but with the forklifts, it falls under work safe, which then falls under a different department within government, and so you've got part of government wanting to progress things because they can see that that's a hole in the industry and what we need, but then you've got the constraints of work safe, which I think comes under the Attorney General's department, and so that's why we just don't seem to be able to progress it. Everyone we talk to in the training sphere understands where we're coming from, but we just don't seem to be able to get over this hurdle within where the laws and regulations lie.
Yeah, well, ministers not talking, or the bureaucrats not talking to the ministers to talk to each other, for crying out loud. But also, Shannon, I'll say this too, and I know your frustration, because I share this. Everyone knows I share this, and we spoke about this in Sydney. And I mean, we can put 17-year-olds in behind the wheel of a V8. Right now, you can start your pilot licence at 16, someone told me the other day. So we need to start working on it. How the heck do we do this? Is that a role that should be led by the Commonwealth? Is that your view?
I think, Senator, the biggest role the Commonwealth could play in that is to get a firm grip on the work health safety regime and argument, because they're working in a bit of a nice little theoretical world, not a real world, and I don't believe they're listening to the consequences. I've got letters from the building and construction industry, the warehousing industry, logistics. It is not just about trucking. And if we can't have the forklift for the young people, we can't provide them with a wage that attracts them into the industry. And they end up at McDonald's or somewhere else and you never get them back. I think the only way to really solve this nationally is for the Commonwealth to prevail in relation to the work health safety regime and give it a reality check. And I think the model we've talked about in South Australia is the key. You don't do it willy-nilly. You do it under a formal contract of training with mandatory levels of supervision and training, and you restrict the licence until they become 18. Then it becomes open. For someone who chooses to do it, it is not hard to do, and it will be very safe. And in the complete absence of evidence from our Safe Work Agency justifying the 18-year-old age, I actually think federal ministers should be talking to each other and get hold of it.
Yes, I'm with you there, Steve. Now, I want to start with the we'll go over time. I'll just let everyone know we're not going to rush this. But I want to talk about some of the prickly stuff in our industry, and I want your feedback on this. And of course, as you know, I travel the nation. I haven't been travelling the nation as much as I'd like to since the COVID, but I'm on the phone constantly to trucking operators and truck drivers, and we need to talk about. I need to hear your views on returns on investment. And Sharon, you touched on this as a not a small operator, as a decent sized operator running across the paddock. We've also had the shipping industry now that are walking. The rail industry are now raising a lot of concerns. I know directly with the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, they're losing their hemorrhaging freight to foreign shipping companies. And of course, we know that we are at the bottom, we're at the end of the food chain, we're price takers on a lot of occasions. I'm hearing so loud and clear, the good old days have gone. Sharon, you touched on supply chain, and I couldn't write it down quick enough. I don't want to put you into a position of naming your clients or anything like this, but is it just, am I getting the wrong feedback from all these hundreds of people I talk to that the rates are heading south, the return on investment is heading south? One operator, a major operator, told me months ago the difference between a profit and a loss is a headwind. You want to comment on that?
Sorry, what was the end of that, Steve? I just didn't hear the end of the question. It was all very echoey.
Okay, the end bit was Senator Searle was saying that a large operator told him recently that the difference between a profit and not is very minor because rates are just being driven down across the board by the customer base and within industry. So the basic question is about, are we concerned about the return on your investment as a truck operator? And I guess what can be done about it?
Yeah, well, I'd have to say that I'm probably, with what I do, in the lowest earning sector of the industry. I mean, people that are carting fresh fruit and vegetables and specialised areas seem to still be able to demand that the rate that they need because they are so essential. For me, I'm competing with rail, and so I've had to get smarter about how I do things. And when I think about, the early days in the late 70s and 80s, like we were running single trailers across the Perth. But there's no way that you could do that now, and that's where B doubles and road trains and B triples have come into it, and it's been more about getting more behind the thing that is towing the freight to keep adjusting to what all the increases are. I think probably what's the hardest thing is that there are operators that don't invest and spend on the training and all the safety measures and all the things that some operators do, and it gives you an unfair ballpark, and that's a worry for me on the run that I do. But yeah, there's certain areas of the trucking industry that are better financially than other sectors of the industry, that's for sure.
I think there's another key element to that, Senator. But when we hear, as we do from time to time, and you know, but I'm not sure Senator McDonald does, wages are about 35% of the cost structure, roughly, and fuel's up around 30 to 35 as well. So if an operator can find a way to substantially reduce their wage bill, they actually can get a huge gain that lets them massively undercut other operators, and it drags everybody down on the rate scale. Now, we are aware from comments made by a driver in relation to a company that whilst the going award rate is 42 cents a kilometre for the work he does, he and his co-driver get paid 13 cents per kilometre whilst they're driving. Now, the difficulty is if those drivers don't make complaints, it doesn't get investigated. The NHVR can't investigate that. The prime contractor or customer should know that something's going on because this company has undercut all the other companies by an astronomical amount. The review of the Heavy Vehicle National Law is intended to make all parties in the chain accountable for ensuring the safety of their road transport operations. But you can't get the NHVR interested in looking at things like wage rates. So there is a bit of a problem in that area, and it can have a massive impact on competition and rates. Some operators are able to say to their customers, I don't work for rates that are lower than this because it's not viable. But too many operators do get pushed into taking lower rates. One of the challenges is to improve the education level within the industry, because at the end of the day, we do have a market forces scenario, and it's really the only viable way of operating, but it comes with that weakness that some people might not get their act together and might get done over. So it is a conundrum, but I firmly believe that if we do a real job with the review of the heavy vehicle law and we stop mucking around with dents in reflectors and other inconsequential minor technical defects that bear no relevance but impose massive costs on the industry, the downtime of the vehicle, if I have to get a truck inspected, I'll replace everything that's half worn so they don't fail it. But it's only half worn, and so our costs are far higher than they should be. a proper risk-based heavy vehicle law enforced effectively and dealing with those other issues. I'd like to see the NHVR pick up the phone to the Fair Work Ombudsman, for example, and say, I think there's a problem here, can you have a look? But it doesn't happen.
Steve, don't hold your breath, because I myself personally have not only rang the Fair Work Ombudsman, written to the Fair Work Ombudsman, and we're pleading with them. And you know where I stand on this. Everyone knows where I stand on this. There are many, many thousands of decent, hard-working men and women in the transport industry. But, you know, there comes a time when and Sharon, I don't know if you can hear me, but you did touch on, the top of the supply chain are notorious for those terrible words of sharpen your pencil. And Steve, you touched on this, knowing darn well that their freight needs to be carted around the country, and we're ready to do it. We want to do it, we want to do it safe, we want to do it efficiently, because the majority of transport companies, their drivers are family. I don't mean they're actually related, but they treat them as family all the way through. Yeah. And their mechanics and their staff that answer the phone and everything. So let's dig a little bit further there. What would SARTA see as, and you've touched on the heavy vehicle national law, well, the regulator, well, let's not hold our breath, there's a lot of work to be done there. Yep. But is it unfair of me to continually request, all I want is the Fair Work Ombudsman to do their job? Stop, as a nation, penning the people who are trying to do the right thing. Get that sector of our industry that are absolutely blatantly doing everything wrong and target them. What's your thoughts there? What should we do there?
Well, we have had inquiries or audits, if you like, by the industry over the years, and the industry's actually come up pretty well, but I suspect that's because they've looked at the bulk who are doing it right. And they're not getting their intel act together with the other agencies like the police and the NHVR. But the other thing we need, I think, in addition to the Fair Work Ombudsman, having a better look and maybe being able to take referrals from other agencies, that might be a legal problem that they've got. But the whole question of fair terms of contract, the payment timelines and all of that is also very critical. There are some operators and some customers, quite large, who have contracts that you can only describe as abusive, and they get away with it. We need to be able to bring an end to that, because they have a very major influence on the culture within the industry and the market rates that they establish, and everyone else gets dragged down to. If the heavy vehicle law was applied as it should be, then directors of those companies should be asked the question, so you know what it costs you to run your own trucks from Perth, but over here with this subcontractor, you're paying half that rate. How have you satisfied yourself that they are doing that safely and legally?
Yeah, and that's where we need some backup from. We need backup. The government needs a role. They have a role to play here, for crying out loud. Well, I'm going to run on to, and I do want to touch on this because Sharon, you touched on this. Steve, you also just touched on it. One of my other bugbears, and there's a number of them, is fatigue management. Now, I confess I was part of the working group that introduced fatigue management here in Western Australia when we were told by the minister at the time, either we do it or he does it, which was code for us saying we don't want him to do it. And our other code was, we don't want what happens on the eastern seaboard, because as far as I'm concerned, I don't have a lot of friends outside of the eastern seaboard too often. That is a complete and utter dog's breakfast, your fatigue management over there. I know you have AFM and there's other things. How can we improve the fatigue management, particularly, Sharon, with the investment that your company has made in technology?
Yeah, well, look, the whole thing about fatigue, and you'll hear every driver tell you it, it's got to not be about counting time. It's got to be about being able to rest when you need to rest and work when you can work. And it also definitely needs to be treated differently whether you are in rural and remote zones and whether you're in mainstream capital city to capital city where you're engaging in a lot more traffic, cities, townships, possibly loading and unloading, and it's a completely different task to rural and remote Australia. And, you know, you just find too many people that don't do the job sticking their nose in and telling the rest of us how it is they think we should all operate. I mean, everything just doesn't go to plan every single trip when you're out there, and you need to have that flexibility that you're able to deal with that and make the decisions you need to make to get yourself from A to B safely. I mean, no one goes out on the road with the intent that they want to roll over and hurt themselves and hurt anybody else and wreck the equipment. No one does. You know, like these road trains combinations are multi-million-dollar units, and no one goes out there with that intent. But while you've got do-gooders telling us all, like I can remember being at one meeting listening to a professor that said that trucks should only be on the roads between 9 and 5. I mean, how ridiculous is that? That is not even a solution worth contemplating. You've got drivers that prefer driving at night, drivers that prefer driving in the day. It's all about people being assessed and fitting into jobs and runs that suit the way that they want to operate. But, you know, this whole counting of time and being stuck somewhere for 7.5 hours when you've got 15 minutes from home, and then, you know, the whole concept of electronic work diaries from an administrative point of view, yeah, great to not have to fill out a whole heap of paperwork. But if they're going to burn you for a 14-minute and 57-second break, who's going to touch them? You know, and really in the scheme of things, I can remember an officer in the task force saying one day, it's not the minutes that are killing people, it's the hours and the days. It's about what the overall pattern is. It's not the minutes. So we just keep sweating on things that have no impact and are just not delivering what drivers need to do the job safe on the road. And counting time is not the answer.
Well, I think I'm joined at the hip here with Ronnie Finnemore when he says, and I echo his words too, fatigue management doesn't manage hours. Sorry, Steve, I cut you off.
Yeah, I think this is the biggest risk and concern I see with the review of the heavy vehicle law, because everybody who understands the issue knows exactly that what Sharon just said is right. We also understand there's the political dilemma that if you give people freedom and they get it wrong, then ministers and governments are going to cop the blame for crashes and accidents, but we can't stay where we are. I think all governments are going to have to show a bit of courage in moving to a genuine fatigue management approach. The model we're bouncing around with the review is a simple set of basic rules at the lower end, very basic rules, but with some flexibility. So you don't get nailed for a 14-minute rest break, but you do get nailed for only having 3 hours sleep or 5 hours sleep instead of 7. But above that, you have a system that potentially gives you full flexibility. And if your guardian system says the driver is not fatigued and they're good to drive, they can drive. If it says they are fatigued or they're getting fatigued, then they have to stop. I think this will be a really interesting test for ministers and their officials, whether they've got the courage to make a smart decision and help us manage fatigue, not counting rules.
Very good. So, I'm sorry, Sharon, did you want to add something?
Well, just, you know, like some classic examples, you know, there's a run that we do to Perth and, you know, you can have a guy that's just come off 2 days rest and a guy gets to Lochiel, which is about an hour and a bit out of Adelaide, and there's a crash involving cars, which has closed the highway. He's stuck there for 5 hours. What does he do then? Does he turn that into a 7.5 hour break? He's just come off 2 days off and he's only got an hour up the road. Or does he get going? Is he allowed to reset? But the laws say he can't. So then what happens is for every day of that journey, he will now impact on not just this week, but next week and the week after. And then eventually he's going to have to miss a trip because his reset that he has to work those longer hours has all been thrown into turmoil because of something that happened on the road. You know, the laws are just not taking into account the realities of what we actually deal with out on the highway. And I don't know, I've been to that many meetings where I listen to professors and you know, sleep experts and all sorts of things. And, you know, all right, they've all got their views, and the realities need to be taken into account of what the task is about. And I'm not saying people should drive 24/7, you know, without any kind of consequence or rest. That's just ridiculous. That's the other extreme. But there is a way of doing this responsibly and in a way that will deliver safe outcomes, but we just need people to listen instead of trying to force stuff down our throats.
Yes, and I can't argue, and unfortunately we are running out of time, but I'll throw my last one here, God help us if we listen to the men and women who actually do it for a living. That'd be groundbreaking, wouldn't it? Anyway, that's my cynicism. And as you both know, that I believe that leadership needs to come federal. I think the Commonwealth needs to lead, and you've heard my views that the Commonwealth are great collectors of all things taxation in this nation, or they end up with all the money anyway, or most of it. But I want to congratulate the state associations and the state branches of the TWU and the state representative bodies, because I think they do a magnificent job in their states. And yet it's easier, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, it's easier in your own state because states seem to listen more, there's less, you don't always get what you want. And no better example is the way that all the state leaderships handled the COVID. And I know because I've had to ring you on a number of occasions to get clarification. But what would, in your opinion, to you, Sharon, and to you, Steve, what would a perfect, if you were the minister, if you were the federal, the Commonwealth minister, would you have a working group around you and you would seek information to pass on to the bureaucracy to say, make it happen? If you would, what would it look like? Who would be on it?
Well, look, I know, you know, there's always been this argument with some of these boards and committees that people that are in the game shouldn't be on a panel looking at it all because you're sort of, you know, self-regulating yourself and how can you be trusted to regulate yourself. But at the end of the day, you know, any committee that is formed that talks about how we're all going to operate, if it's real, needs to have representation across the board of the people that do the work. And, you know, it's not just, and transport's such a big thing. You know, what a furniture guy does as opposed to a livestock man, to what an operator off the wharf does, to someone who does line haul, to someone who does rigids around town. I mean, it is just so vast what we all do, you know, and therefore it needs good representation from industry so that the right information is getting back. The real challenges, you know, like I've had some conversations around what goes on in rural remote Australia when things break down. Now, I don't know about you, Glenn, but I haven't seen any glossy, big repair places pop up north of Perth, east of Perth, up through the centre. We're all still relying on some of the repairers and people like that have been around forever that go out and might repair a damage to a dolly or a trailer. There's not the support in rural and remote Australia, yet, you know, we're looking to roll out all these very sophisticated vehicles and then enforce how people will maintain and operate these vehicles. But across the paddock, I know for sure, there's not the support and backup of all these repairers that are keeping ahead of all this technology. But we keep imposing all this technology on the industry. But what are we going to do about things like that? And they're the sort of realities that governments, when they're thinking about ADRs, they need to sit and listen to the industry about, well, we're in the middle of nowhere. We've got this latest model thing that we're driving with all these trailers on the back. If it breaks down, who's going to fix it? You know, like some of these little townships have got one bloke that if there's a wedding or a funeral or he wants to go surfing, that's where he'll go, and he doesn't care about something sitting on the side of the road for multiple days.
No, just puts out the Cape Northern Highway and WA wants to go surfing, we won't see him for a week. But no, I do got to take that on board, Sharon. You're spot on. Sorry,
I think I can make a suggestion about what it shouldn't look like.
Righto.
It should not replicate the mistake that's been made for years, which is governments of all persuasions consulting with high-profile large operators only. Because they are, with all due respect to them, the senior management in those groups are so far removed from the task and the reality. They do take a good, broad global view, and they're entitled to that view, but it's often a false view of the real world, and it doesn't deal with the real issues. So I would argue that we've got the Australian Trucking Association, we've also got NatRoad and the Australian Livestock Association. They would have to be the core of, and they do a really good job, they would have to be the core of any process. And I think the trick is to have a balance between individual operators who know about the nuts and bolts, but you also need, unfortunately, people like me and my colleagues who understand the policy issues that we also have to try and deal with. Because if you just deal with the nuts and bolts, you end up in a policy problem. And if you just deal with the policy problem, you end up with an operational problem. You need both. But I would think that comprehensive engagement with the ATA and the other peak bodies is a very good start. Bringing in others, and the one gap, and one of the pushes we've been making for the review of the heavy vehicle law, which the NTC's picked up, we must establish a rural and remote zone that recognises that most of Queensland, a chunk of New South Wales, the great majority of South Australia and all of the Northern Territory and WA are rural and remote. The risk profiles are completely different and their operational needs are very different. If you just talk to the big boys and girls in the industry, you get a Hume Highway view.
Sure. Steve, I just want to pull you up on one thing there already. I found our first disagreement. Well, maybe not a disagreement, a little bit of a black hole we can fill in. I think it's imperative, and I agree with you, you get the big boys, just only hearing from the big boys, you hear the big boys' issues, and maybe they're the ones that Inland Rail consulted. To say the transport industry would use the rail. Yeah, anyway, that's not true. I also think there is a massive cohort that is so underrepresented out there being the owner-drivers.
Absolutely.
And my view is very clear that they do need to figure out where they want to be represented, and they must be heard. They absolutely, and I'm also, as you very well know, believe the union has to be sitting there in the room too, because I believe all players need to be in the room. And in my own vast history around this industry, it's amazing what we can do when we're all in the room and we actually get on the same page. So I'd probably just throw that in there too.
No, look, I would agree with you, Senator, and I've been doing this for 26 years, and for quite a long time, the Federal Secretary of the Union was a fellow called John Allen, and he was in the room and worked very effectively with the industry, and we achieved a lot of safety improvements, and he ran a hard bargain, and there were good, frank discussions. That sort of dialogue, I absolutely agree, that needs to be a key part of the process.
Okay. All right, now just leave you...
Sorry,
yes,
sorry, Glenn, can I just say something? Look, it's really hard for operators too, because commercially we've all got to work in this space. And, you know, and it can be scary, and like, we're all good at running our businesses and working hard, you know, like Bob and I at times, you know, we've been called Ma and Pa transport, you know, because our values here are what they are. We've remained very family orientated. We haven't taken the path of the temptation of growing massively. We've kept it to a point where we've got quite a flat structure with management. And I've had others around me that do the same thing I do, but are ended up being a lot bigger than me, refer to myself and Bob as Ma and Pa, you know. Like, it's scary having a voice. It's scary raising all these difficult issues and having the conversation, because, you know, you've got to deal with the consequences of all of that. And I think anything moving forward, if we're really going to get to the bottom of everything that we deal with, operators need to feel that they've got a safe environment that they can raise the issues as well.
Absolutely. Now, look, what I will do is I'm going to leave you on this last one because we will move on because there's so much more we need to talk about, but I'm getting it. The messages around the nation are all the same. They're coming from different packages, but they're all around the same. There's a few out here, but anyway, we get all that, and that's the part that's the part that puts the wind under my wings, is because we're not diametrically opposed like we were in the bad old 70s and 80s and whatnot. So anyway, there's a hope there. But could you imagine this? Now, Senator McDonald's on mute, and we're on the same team here. Could you imagine if the Agriculture Minister took all his recommendations and developed legislation because it had been put to him by the bureaucracy and professors? There you go. Think about that one. I'll leave you on that one. I know you want to say something, Steve. I know you're dying to say something. I'll give you 3 seconds if you want, but you've been around this game too long. You'll probably just nod and anyway. All right. On saying that, can I thank you, Sharon, for joining us wherever you are, and Steve, thank you very much. When COVID is over, we will physically be getting together because there's a lot more work I want to progress and follow up because seriously, I want this great industry to be even greater, and there are many challenges, and it is now time to address them and, more importantly, fix them, in my opinion, and I don't think I'm on my own there. So, thank you very much to SARTA, and we will now call